Hi everyone, it's Xhanthi here, and I thought I'd share with you how I made my latest wall sculpture. So this girl I sculpted in ZBrush, and then I had her printed and I did a lot of sanding and refining and made a mold, which I then cast off. I use smooth cast 300 for these, and that works really well for me, and I don't get too many air bubbles, at least not in bad places, because the sculpt is fairly simple because I can't afford a pressure pot to put these in. And it cures pretty fast. It only takes about 10 minutes to cure, so that's really great. And then after I cast it, I usually sand them down and just, refine it and make sure it's as smooth as it can be. And then I paint it. I paint her in a very similar way to how I paint ball jointed dolls. I mean, the biggest difference is that she doesn't have the eye holes, so I have to paint the eyes in as well as everything else. So that just adds, an extra level on top. But otherwise, aside from painting the eyes, it's pretty similar to painting a doll, only she's much larger. I start off with airbrushing a light base of colour onto her before I add any of the details. So she has a sort of basic skin tone colour to her, and I add some blues and some greens into that mix as well, just to give her a little more depth. And this is just me doing some skin texturing. I added some freckling and sunspots and discoloration and that sort of thing, and then I went in and I added some very fine veins and other little details, some freckles and moles, but it's the same process. I add in more shading and colouring and a little more depth and that sort of thing until I get it to the look that I'm after. Both the brushes that I'm using are liner brushes. One is a Master Brand brush and the other one is a La Cornell brush, which I think I've mentioned in previous videos. But the one that I'm using for the eyelashes is a zero liner brush, and the one that I'm using for the eyeliner is just a slightly bigger liner brush, but they're both the same type of brush. The brushes that I'm using for adding the shading to her face are makeup brushes, and they work because they're larger and fluffier than the brushes that I usually use for doing dolls, because she's so much larger than a regular doll face. The eyes are kind of tricky. They take quite a lot of layers to get right. And I start off by just sort of blocking things in with flat colour so that I know where I want everything. And then after that I go in and I start working on the shading. And I'm using acrylic paint for this. The acrylic paint is pretty thinned down to try and get a smooth, flat finish, because that way it just gives it a nicer, glassier finish when I gloss it at the end. This is an 8x8 wood panel board that I'm painting on. The two holes in it are holes for the screws for when I screw the head in place. The baseboard I painted the same way that I painted the head, so I added the same flesh tones and colours with the airbrush, and then I added skin texture and veining and that sort of thing, so it just helps her blend in. All of the paint I'm using is acrylic, and the brand I use is Golden. These flowers I'm just trying to keep really loose and free, so there's a basic sketch there just so I could plan out where I wanted stuff, but then I'm just sort of painting them in a really loose kind of way because I wanted them to come across as being very natural and organic and have a painterly feel about them. So this design was inspired by some really cool tattoo art that I've seen. I like the contrast between very geometric, precise designs on an organic canvas. And so that's kind of what I was trying to go for here, or at least that was my inspiration. I liked the contrast between the organic flowers and then the geometric flowers that I used later on. And I just thought it played well together. And the thick black lines really harken back to that idea of tattoo to begin with. This is all done in acrylics, and that light grey shading is just a light black acrylic wash, which I'm just slowly building up. And I really like the watercolour effect and look that it kind of gives the flowers. The pen that I'm using is I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Faber-Castell. I don't know if it's Faber-Castell or Faber-Castell. I don't know. It's German, right? I don't know. So I'm just going to go ahead with Faber. It's a Faber-Castell Pit Artist pen, and it is India ink, which is great because when India ink dries, it becomes permanent. And it's no longer water soluble, which is why a lot of watercolor artists will use India ink for inking. Anyway, that's what I use to do all of the little flower dots. And this is how she turned out. I'm really pleased with how she worked out. I love that side glance that I gave her because I wanted to experiment and play around with expression a little bit. And I'm just really pleased with it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any suggestions for anything you'd like to watch, then just leave that in the comments below and I will do my best. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.